So thank you all for being here today at the second edition of CSIS's Doing Business in Ukraine conference, and especially for joining this afternoon's panel about Moldova's potential role in Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery. I'm Leah Keefe. I'm a non-resident senior associate here at CSIS, and I want to give a bit of framing for today's conversation before we turn to our wonderful panelists, and then to some questions from all of you. Moldova is less than 4 hours from the ongoing kinetic combat and shares a border of more than 1,000 miles with Ukraine. It's widely agreed that if Russian troops had succeeded in their initial advance across Ukraine, they would have continued to Chisinau. But thankfully, this did not happen, and Moldova's support for Ukraine has been unwavering, including taking in the highest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita of any country in the world. Moldova's political future is, for better or worse, now tied to Ukraine's. This extends not only to Ukraine's success on the battlefield, but also to its pathways through EU accession talks and beyond. For those looking to support Ukraine's eventual reconstruction now, Moldova may be a natural avenue. Moldova's location makes it an ideal venue to explore, but there are challenges to this idea. Moldova has historically struggled with emigration, making finding and retaining skilled talent one of the largest challenges facing private industry and government across the country. Moldova has also historically struggled with energy, not just in the supply of gas and electricity, but also in the structure and ownership of the sector. The energy sector is an example of Moldova's ongoing challenges with creating a regulatory environment that is understandable and sufficiently static to support investment, whether foreign or domestic. While regulatory reforms, as well as rule of law efforts, are ongoing, they could be reversed depending on the results of Moldova's October presidential and next year's parliamentary elections. The foundations to support Moldova for an eventual Ukrainian reconstruction, including mitigating these and other challenges, should be laid now, and if done thoughtfully, are a natural way to support not only Moldova, but also Ukraine. And with that brief framing, we are so pleased to have such an expert panel joining us today to support this discussion. So let me start with some introductory remarks from Natalia Gavrilica, the former Prime Minister of Moldova, who is the co-founder and director of Partnerships for a New Economy, an economic policy think tank focused on Moldova's EU integration. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest. So I will actually start by following up on what has been said already. Moldova matters. And I will double down on why it matters for Ukraine. Because Russia thinks it matters. And if Russia has significant influence over Moldova, then combined with the sway that it has over Belarus, it is capable of encircling Ukraine and creating significant problems for Ukraine from its southwestern border. And we heard it's quite a long border, over 1,000 miles. We also know that this is a foothold for Russia into the Black Sea region. There is a reason why the Southeastern European front of the Soviet Union was actually headquartered in Moldova, in the Transnistrian region. And to this day, we have all the munitions in the Kolbasna village that are stored from the Soviet times. And then also, this is a demonstration of power, because Russia wants to show that it can still have influence over what it considers its rightful sphere of influence. So to Russia, this is something that can demonstrate to other countries that it is a global player. And you know, Moldova's economy has been affected significantly by the war in Ukraine. And by the way, I want to contextualize everything I say here with our sincere gratitude for what Ukraine is doing. We do believe that Ukraine is fighting for Moldova as well, and for Europe, and for global values, as we have heard in the last panel. So, you know, it could have been worse, but what I'm saying is that Moldova's economy suffered. So in 2022, we had quite a profound stagflation. So we had recession of 6%, so a decreasing growth, a decrease of the economy of 6%, and then inflation in October 2022 reached 35%. If we look at cumulative inflation, it's probably been over 50%. And then there is quite a disbalance in the economy. So to this day, despite this inflation and our big current account deficit, we have a very overvalued currency. And part of it is because Russia is bringing in a lot of cash, but part of it is because there is cash flowing from Ukraine as well. And Moldova can be significantly impacted by a ramp up in reconstruction efforts. And this is because actually we are in an integrated regional economy, and it's going to affect the entire region. We've heard again earlier today that it will be an effort that is the biggest since the Second World War, reconstruction effort. And the demand that potentially can exist in Ukraine is orders of magnitude higher than the supply that Moldova and other countries is able to provide. That's why I believe that, you know, if we care about the resilience of the region, the entire region, and if we care about sort of planning this correctly, then we need to double down on investing in Moldova now in preparation for what is needed in Ukraine. And some of it is happening, but in my view, that's not enough. So some of the areas where Moldova would be affected is labor market. We have significant immigration flows, and sort of a demand in Ukraine would mean further immigration from Moldova and further deficit of labor force. Then we have already seen the cost of construction materials rise, so the inflation in cost of materials and raw materials, and then a sort of detraction of investment as well. So what do I think needs to be done in this regard? So one, I have been talking about sort of strategic geopolitical investments since day one. And I do believe that governments need to provide tools to encourage the private sector to come to Moldova. So we have seen in the energy sector, by the way, Moldova has been punching above its weight, and it reoriented its gas supplies for mainland Moldova, excluding the Transnistrian region, in 1 year, from 100% dependency on Russia to 100% of gas provided through acquisition on the market, while prices were very, very high. And I want to remind you that countries in Europe didn't do that. Many countries in Europe, richer than Moldova, did not do that. Part of the reason we were able to do that is because there have been companies that took political risk insurance from the DFC and were able to participate in the acquisitions that the government organized. We need that much more in various sectors, particularly on infrastructure and infrastructure development. So, you know, we can think of glass, cement. So we need more investment in companies that can produce materials that would be needed for the reconstruction. And of course, we need investment in infrastructure and connectivity. We have been rebuilding roads a lot. There is, USAID is financing a feasibility study for a new logistics center where we have railway with the Soviet gauge connecting with the railway with the European gauge. And you know, we need people to notice projects like this, like investment in the logistics center in Beresh. And just one last comment is that all of this is happening while Moldova and Ukraine are negotiating with the EU. And even though strategically this is very much aligned, but on technical terms, there will have to be very careful consideration of EU accession negotiations in terms of competition and state aid rules, because the reconstruction of Ukraine will require exceptions from EU rules. At the same time, it will require a careful balance of the interests of member states for political reasons. So, I want to commend the Competition Authority of Ukraine, which is already publishing opinions on how state aid rules could be changed or what exemptions could be made for specific post-war reconstruction efforts. So I will stop here. I'm happy to answer questions, but I encourage everybody to sort of think of reconstruction of Ukraine as a piece of resilience. So it's not too early to talk about reconstruction of Ukraine. And for Moldova, it's definitely not too early.
Thank you, ma'am. So we're going to go next to Natalia Jaresko, the former finance minister of Ukraine, and she is currently a member of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on the future of financing and capital. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. It's very hard to follow up on Natalia. And I'm Ukrainian. So I look at this question from a Ukrainian perspective. I think it helps Ukraine for investors to invest in Moldova today. And I think one of the reasons I'll say, which is somewhat in contrast to a previous panel, is many businesses are not yet prepared to invest in Ukraine, not while there's ongoing bombings. And all of those investors should think of Moldova as a very strong part of the solution while this is all happening. That 1,000-kilometer border is the longest. You think it's Poland, but it's not. The longest border with Ukraine is with Moldova. And for southwestern Ukraine, for Odessa, for Kherson, for Mykolaiv, this could be a tremendous support while those regions are still being bombed daily, right? I don't know who you can convince to go to Kherson right now when the Russian troops are over this other side of the river. But what you can do is establish logistics hubs in Moldova. The proximity is critical. There's another thing that people don't focus on, which is that there's capital access in Moldova. National Bank of Moldova discount rates are quite low. You can actually borrow money in Moldovan banks, in Moldovan lei, at 6 to 8% annually. So the cost of financing, commercial financing, is reasonable today, to get started today. I would argue that the strong connection that Moldova has to the EU is critical. Its relationship with Romania has given it a head start on EU accession, on understanding the challenges of the EU markets. It's a great place for an investor who's worried about Moldova's population size, for example, or labor, because where they're located, you have access to the EU markets as well. And through Romania, which is just about to become the largest gas producer in Europe, it's not a bad entree, and it's not a bad balancing act as Ukraine begins to demand more, and until Ukraine demands more, you've got immediate access to the Romanian market. And I think for many businesses, this should be today, if you want to support, in particular, southwestern Ukraine, don't wait. You don't have to wait. You can invest in Moldova. I've been investing in Moldova since 1995, with an exception of a couple recent years. And you can find the human capital. You can find managerial capital. You can recruit it. Many people have left, but they want to come home. And it's a simpler environment from a business perspective than many other countries in the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine. But there's a value to Moldova as well. So if you're a Moldova fan, which I am, not just a Ukraine fan, it's a small, open economy. And your investments and the participation in Ukraine's recovery, although that may be, someone said earlier, $500 billion to $1.3 trillion, any small part of that will have significant impact on the Moldovan economy. A $1 million, a $2 million, a $10 million, a $100 million investment is enormous it has an enormous effect for Moldova. I think there is an element of fighting the Russian propaganda that you are contributing to if you are in Moldova. I think, Russian propaganda makes it sound that the West can't be counted on. Democracies are fickle. And we all disagree with that. But the proof of the pudding for the population is when investments are made and jobs are created by those Western companies, and they have access and knowledge and interaction with, the ability to provide that disinformation to the Moldovan population will be reduced significantly. And the last thing I'll say is that I think that investing in both countries is going to be very helpful to accelerating EU accession for both countries. I think the learning process between us, the issues that we share are greater than the issues that we differ on. And I think the partnership between the countries has only grown throughout this war because of Moldova's incredible role when the Black Sea was not available for us to ship our exports in terms of logistics. So I just think that there are reasons for you as business people, and then I can tell you that I think that those reasons for investing will serve Moldova well and serve bringing an end to this war well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And next, we're going to hear from Mark Simakovsky, the Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID, where he oversees programs supporting democracy, development, and governance, as well as overseeing regional and bilateral programs for Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus. And he brings a wealth of experience from across the region from his time at the Department of Defense, State Department, and working on the Hill. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks so much. And thanks to CSIS, first and foremost, for hosting this conference. It's not only an indication of CSIS's leadership on responding to Russian aggression and the focus on Ukraine, but also CSIS is becoming an incredible partner on focusing on Moldova and Moldova's role in this moment in the region that's so critical for U.S. national security interests. I just returned from Moldova on Friday. I was happy to participate in the U.S. government delegation for the Moldova Ministerial Conference for the Moldova Partnership Platform. It's an annual donors conference that brings together critical donors, which is co-chaired by the Romanians, the French, and the German foreign ministers. This is a really important year for Moldova. Obviously, it has elections coming up, and this platform meeting was critical to reinforce how much partners are doing, not only to support Moldova's needs, but move from a donors conference to a real partnership platform that will provide Moldova the needs for not only its economic assistance needs, but also its human capital needs, and of course, to ensure that the Moldovan government feels that they have a partner on all the reforms that are going to be required as Moldova pursues EU membership. Business enabling environment and infrastructure and energy were three key areas that were a key piece of the discussion at this year's partnership platform. Moldova is a key strategic partner for the United States. Actually, in about an hour, Administrator Power, my boss, is going to be having a Democracy Delivers event in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. I was in New York on Monday. And Moldova is a Democracy Delivers country, selected as a key priority for U.S. aid and for the U.S. government because of its partnership with the United States, because of its democratic reforms, because of the key role that the Moldovan government is playing as a leader in the region, and then, of course, as a priority in areas like regional energy security. We were really pleased at this platform this year to announce a very, I would say, historic new level of funding that we're working with the Congress on, which will be $75 million from the U.S. government, from the Fifth National Security Supplemental, to provide Moldova additional assistance in infrastructure, logistics, and cybersecurity. Again, in terms of scale, Moldova has had very significant funding over the last few years as a result of the U.S. government renewed focus on Europe and Eurasia from the war in Ukraine. But Moldova in particular, we've chosen as an area that funding directly related to the conflict in Ukraine also should be used externally. And again, this funding in particular on infrastructure is going to be used in a way that benefits Ukraine's ability to export and the ability to improve the latent infrastructure that has not seen the kind of investment that's been required over the last 30 years, and ultimately will allow Moldova, we hope, to be a key node of transit access between Ukraine, Romania, and the EU. You know, we've heard a lot from the Moldovan government about their deep interest in playing a role in facilitating and supporting Ukrainian recovery and reconstruction. Moldova is already doing it. You see tens of thousands of Ukrainians who the Moldovan government and the Moldovan people have sheltered over the last 2 years. Moldova served and continues to serve as a key transit route for Ukrainian goods and exports. Unfortunately, the consequence of that is you see an infrastructure that is physically not prepared. You know, you go to Moldova, I was there last year, and you see trucks queuing along the borders. You see villages and communities that were never prepared for this level of infrastructure. So it behooves all of us, if we want to support Ukraine's ability to export, support Moldova's economy, and give people a reason to stay inside Moldova, to invest in the country so it can actually invest and support the security that's required. I want to just briefly touch on a few areas that touch how we see the criticality of Moldova for U.S. national security interests and stability in the region. The first is energy. Obviously, energy security impacts all countries in the region. Moldova has done an incredible job, as Natalia laid out, in weaning itself off Russia's monopolistic attempt to control Moldova's energy sector. So the north-south flow of the Trans-Balkan pipeline, because of some of the technical assistance and Moldova's own deep commitment, Moldova was able to reduce its own gas supply on the right bank by 100%. We've also provided upgrades to gas interconnection points to help the Moldovan and Ukrainian government. And then, of course, U.S. aid through the $300 million supplemental request that came through from Moldovan Energy is working to upgrade transmission lines between Moldova and Romania. And at the partnership platform last week, we met with the Romanian foreign minister and are really seeing incredible progress on putting together and ensuring that that line is built in a timely fashion on both sides of the border, in addition to lines that the World Bank and other donors are investing in. The second, of course, is the transportation sector. And this new $75 million announcement that we're hoping in cooperation with Congress that will be moving quickly is really a new novel investment of the U.S. government, and something that USAID is going to be very deeply invested in over the next few years. So in one, we're helping and working with the Moldovan Customs Service to do some of the things that the Ukrainian government has done in terms of EQing to reduce wait times along the border. We're hoping to obviously do complete a feasibility study on the Brest dry port. But again, the focus is there are going to be new opportunities to partner with the private sector, to hear from the private sector about how USAID funding should be spent on working to improve Moldova's rail, road, and river infrastructure. The other area clearly is, you know, what can we all do together? Obviously, this conference is intended to bring a lot of experts, both in the public and the private sector, to facilitate a discussion. And we at USAID, we have a team here that works every single day to strengthen U.S.-Moldovan relations and to use the tools that the Congress in a bipartisan fashion have given us. But we cannot do anything we want in terms of U.S. national interests without the expertise and the engagement of the private sector. The private sector has to be involved. The Moldovan government has to be responsible in facilitating reform, enabling and creating an investment climate that actually is attractive to businesses. Moldova is in a very competitive region for investment, and it has a very, I would say, counterproductive element, which is there's a war raging next to its borders. But again, because of the war raging and because of the entire international community's focus on Ukraine, Moldova has an incredible moment in terms of focus from the U.S. government, focus from the private sector, focus from the EU, because all of our aspirations are to make and help facilitate Moldova's ability to be an EU member state. And that creates an incredible magnet for investment, where you have a country that could be a member of the EU in the coming years. Also, of course, the private sector, we have to serve a role in the government to also answer questions, take advice, take opinions, and then find ways potentially to partner. And again, after this meeting, our door is always open to the private sector and your ideas and your concerns as well about ensuring that Moldova can improve itself as an enabling environment. And then, of course, we have to do it together with the private sector and donors, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion and appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you, sir. And speaking of private sector, We're going to turn next to Alex Gozan. He is currently the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Moldova, as well as the head of PricewaterhouseCoopers Moldova office and their director of business and public sector advisory services, and previously held positions within the Moldovan government, including the Ministry of Economy.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I'll keep my AmCham hat on for this discussion, and I'll start with saying I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, and the first question was, why is Moldova a subject of discussion in this context, which led me to thinking exactly how this is important for Moldova in the first place. Of course, as it was already mentioned, I mean, if we look at it, I mean, it's a no-brainer in terms of the scale of the economy. We're talking about what? Altogether, if you evaluate Moldova, it's like $50–60 billion. And just hearing the figures which are voiced these days about the resources required for Ukraine's reconstruction, putting it into perspective, it's huge. But for Moldova, anything which would be relevant from the contribution to the reconstruction process is very relevant from the economic standpoint. So it's a no-brainer. So I think we would be aligned on this. And of course, it's clear that the only way Moldova can actually develop economically and have a clear path into the economic development towards the region, towards the EU, is by having a foreign direct investment flow, which would allow for that, which would significantly increase the GDP per capita. So we'd have people coming back, which is like $15,000 to $20,000 GDP per capita. So we need to do that jump, and that cannot happen without the foreign direct investments inflow. But the question was, why would the US companies care about this? I mean, okay, for Moldova it's important. Why is it important for the US companies? Well, because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity today, especially if you are a company who might be thinking of investing in Ukraine, but it's still reluctant because there are military risks as of now. So you might, as it was mentioned, you might think of this investment as building up on further on to expand to Ukraine, and or why not expand your ongoing investments which are happening in Poland or in Romania, the US investments, I mean. So it's a number of scenarios through which it might be relevant, focusing specifically geographically on southwestern Ukraine region, right? And we have Odessa region represented here for a reason, right? Now, how it is to do business in Moldova, and I'll quote a few statements from our business sentiment survey we have run in AmCham with our members, about 100 of them. And I'd say that the conclusion was that it's cautious optimism about doing business in Moldova. Of course, you have issues. They were mentioned, part of them, labor force availability, infrastructure, geopolitical risks, and macroeconomic trends. All is there. But also a positive side of it, that businesses are actually working in Moldova as of now, American, European businesses, and they're being quite profitable. This is, of course, we cannot have this discussion without touching upon the impact of the war on doing business in Moldova. Natalia has mentioned a bit of how it did impact the overall economic development of Moldova. We have felt it in the AmCham community as well, of course, like transportation and logistics issues, which were in the beginning of the war. Of course, you'd be looking at how that reduced the volumes of goods which were imported to the region because of the decrease of demand in Ukraine, and you would not have enough attractiveness to bring goods over in Moldova. But on the other hand, if looking at the positive side, the opportunities are the re-export which happened using the Moldovan infrastructure and so on. And when thinking about what would be the business opportunities, like in terms of sectors or industries which are relevant for the purpose of this discussion, we can talk about construction materials, of course. And we are talking about plaster, cement, glass, plastics. Renewable energy was mentioned by Mark, the support of USA, but we are talking about some potential to build renewable projects in Moldova and expand them in southwestern region of Ukraine. And I'm thinking here about some other discussions which are happening in Ukraine, for instance, on hydrogen Ukraine, the corridor to the EU. Will it go bypass Moldova, or eventually, if it happens, or it go through the territory of Moldova? So these are the questions which are to be discussed as of today, because later on it might be already too late. Someone else would be discussing it. Logistics as well. I will not stay too much on it because we have Mark, who has mentioned the large logistics projects, but we also have Ellie, who will tell a great story on how you can do this, do business in Ukraine while being present in Moldova. Medical services, private medical services. We have currently discussions between our member companies in AmCham and Ukrainian or Ukraine-based international companies about the private medical services, how we can actually expand our work there in the regions which are close to our border. And this all aligns with what we have heard from Ambassador McKinney in the morning, right? All the industries, but we can also mention the agriculture, we can tech again, and why not maybe some more sophisticated areas. So it's clearly an opportunity there. How do I see my personal view on what are the next steps, what should be happening further on? It's first, we need a certain level of political dialogue between the countries, Ukraine, Moldova, the US, because there are some elements of trade in terms of barriers or enhancement opportunities which have to be discussed at the political level. And not less importantly, we need to have a plan. Because if we talk about the country level plan, I don't seem to have it as of now. Natalia has mentioned some of the elements of what needs to be done. Now we need to have a clear view and somehow an alignment on that. So that's first. Secondly, the financial instruments availability, both in terms of grants or fiscal or financial incentives, but also the guarantee instruments. Again, it's a discussion. Last week, during the Moldova Business Week, we had a session about the guarantee instruments coming from the European institutions, like EBRD, EIB, the World Bank, and the US is clearly looking at it, so we need to discuss that more and actually build up the message about the availability of those instruments. So, thirdly, it's access to information from central authorities in Ukraine, but also direct interaction with the local authorities. I think that can boost the interaction between the businesses. I'll give an example. One of the companies which came to the URC in Berlin was asking from Moldova, was asking exactly about this, where we can find more information about what are the business opportunities in Ukraine. We are building steel metal constructions. So we would like to see what are the tenders, where can we actually engage. And the last, but certainly not the least, is EU integration as a boost for investor confidence, of course, on one hand, but on the other hand, to make sure that, exactly as Natalia mentioned, the progress on that should be balanced enough in order to make the businesses to develop and to access those financial instruments on one side, and also balanced enough so that the US companies could operate in optimum conditions. Sometimes, well, we know about differences between the EU and the US on the regulation level, so that's something to keep in mind. And of course, I'll say that above all of what I've mentioned, Moldova can be a good neighbor to Ukraine and actually help Ukraine to pass through this crisis and war, and I'd wish peace to both Ukraine and Moldova. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And speaking of Southwest Ukraine, we're going to come next to Ludmila Krakopechko, the mayor of the Doboslav, which is a community in the Odessa Oblast, where she has won many honors for her work, including the Presidential Award. Over to you, ma'am.
Дякую. Для мене дуже велика честь бути присутньою. For me, it's a great honor to be present today at this conference and to have this opportunity of speaking in front of you. I would like to thank you for your invitation and would like to thank you for your support for Ukraine, for the fact that the issue of Ukraine is always on your agenda. And please remember that we will always remember it, will appreciate it, and we're grateful to you. The topic of Moldovan and Ukrainian relations is close to me because I represent the region which is in direct contact with Moldova. We're talking about Odessa region. And the state line, which is now Odessa region, is only 320 kilometers away. So I'm very familiar with all the pros and cons from this neighborhood. And it was mentioned today, our two countries had shared past because for many years we were part of one country. We always looked upon Moldova as our friend, and after the full-scale invasion, our relations just strengthened because Moldova became one of the first countries that stretched its hands of assistance to Ukraine. And hundreds of thousands of Ukraine on the first days of the full-scale invasion crossed the border between Ukraine and Moldova, and frankly I have no idea where you found those resources to place so many compatriots of mine in your country. You can't imagine what kind of lines were on the border. You can't imagine how many women, children, elderly people there, but they found placement in your country. A lot of my relatives, friends and relatives also were in Moldova, and as of today 97,000 Ukrainians remain there, and all of them actually are taken care of. They all are respected, they all have jobs, and they continue being there, hoping for the day when they have a chance to go back to Ukraine after the war is over. I also know that during 24/7 through those border lines there were trucks with humanitarian aid coming to Ukraine. We were receiving generators, medications, food, etc. All that still continues to happen now, and from the bottom of my heart I would like to thank you and on behalf of my compatriots, because not everybody can be here obviously, but I would like to thank you on their behalf. Since the beginning of the war, a lot of cultural events became charitable events. I'm talking about shows, concert, auctions to support Ukraine. And today Moldova continues doing all that. And we will be always grateful to you for all this. At the same time, we have excellent cooperation, especially in our Odessa region. You know, all the most important bilateral documents are signed in Odessa because Odessa is very close to Odessa. So we cooperate with Moldova on different projects, Guam, let's say Lower Danube, Dniester, etc., etc. So we do have partnerships and agreements. So we watch our borders together. Our law enforcement agencies who today are doing everything to reduce smuggling, to reduce the crime rate, to prevent illegal border crossing from happening, as well as illegal drug trafficking. We're implementing the Convention on Protecting the Environment together. All these are very positive steps. We have opened a joint border crossing area, which is a joint project between Ukraine and Moldova and Remy. So we reduced the lines on the border. All these are positive steps. We should be deepening and broadening, not only at the international level, but also at the municipal and local level. I would like to address Ms. Natalia to make sure that more communities on the local level were able to have bilateral relations to reduce the amount of bureaucracy. It's much easier for us to look for common goods, for commonalities in our art, educational and other programs. Just like Natalia Geresko, I represent Ukraine, and I would like to talk from the perspective of Ukrainian about what concerns us. So very concerned about the area which is known as Transnistria today. Since the beginning of the war, all the pro-Russian forces got very active there. We're talking about the separatists, armed and law enforcement forces, as well as with the Russian military contingent, which has been there for many years. So in April of 2022, when we had the most terrible and the most acute stage of that war, we had offensive from all different sides. So our community was getting ready for the Russians to invade our territory, because they were only 50 kilometers away from Odessa, 40 kilometers from Dobroslav, where I live. So at the same time, the situation in Transnistria exacerbated. In April, there was a series of explosions. So their infrastructure was getting damaged. So the government of Transnistria and, well, Russia, they're all accusing Ukraine and all that, talking about acts of terror. So their anti-military contingent was brought to alert. So it was a huge threat, not only for Ukraine, by the way, but also for Moldova. It was a good thing that it did not develop into the acute stage, but a great part of our border has to be defended by the Ukrainian military at the time when we need more reinforcement on the front line. But we cannot remove our troops from there, so they have to be there in the face of imminent danger. So against all this background, I would like to say it's pretty obvious that freezing of local conflicts will not help the solving the issue, but on the other hand, it will provoke Russia to take new and more aggressive steps for multiplying their efforts, especially in Transnistria and other areas. So, okay, look, it started with Transnistria, then we had Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So the expansion of this Russian world we are opposing. So I think it is very important, before even talking and developing cooperation, talking about business and renewal, it is important to implement the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations for withdrawal of all foreign troops from Moldova. So it is necessary to inspect all the weapons that is there. So they've accumulated huge arsenals of weapons there. It is important to demarcate the state borders, because this stretch of state border is not controlled. So there is all kinds of outflows of literature, etc., etc. There are all kinds of groups of saboteurs coming from there. All that needs to be stamped. There is another threat. It is Russian misinformation. Over there in Transnistria, their propaganda machine is actively operating, and this propaganda is disseminated not only in Moldova, and it is very important right before elections. So they're trying to stop the process of our European integration. They're talking that Euro integration is a fake, is a swindle, and nobody needs it. Please stay close and stay by with Russia. Your president is helping Ukraine and shouldn't be doing that. Ukraine is a toxic country and Russia is the best country in the world. Putin is the best president. So this flow of propaganda goes on for like 24/7, coming from different TV channels. And unfortunately, not only the population of Moldova is suffering, the Ukrainians are suffering as well, especially in the areas and cities and villages close to the border, which have been poisoned by this Russian propaganda. So today, just like in Donbass, we have the largest percentage of separatists who are Russia-minded, especially in the border areas. So it really comes to the fact that I have a lot of even relatives and friends who live in border areas. So they had their ties broken, like within one family, because even close relatives do not understand what is going on. So it will be very hard to return them to reality, to real life, and change their world outlook. So it is very important for Ukraine. So as far as to the rest of things, we're going to discuss that. We have real subjects to discuss. There are all common topics which will make both Moldovans and Ukrainians stronger, because our geographical location is close, logistical routes, climate conditions, all those things will be helping our join together. We should be going together to join the European Union and fighting this evil which is doesn't want this progress to happen.
Eli Abbott, who's the president of KVG, where he oversees 90-plus countries and brings 20 years of international military, government, and corporate experience. And he is also a Marine Corps combat veteran. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you to CSIS for this opportunity, and for the fellow panelists for your time. You know, I've learned quite a bit in the lead up to this, and even today, listening. It is very important to look at the whole region and its complexities. You know, Ukraine is not an island. Moldova is a huge part of the picture for all the reasons that we've discussed here today. So KVG, we're primarily a defense contractor. We work in logistics. And, you know, I think the defense industrial base, which will be discussed later, you know, it does have a power of innovation that has yet to be harnessed for this effort. You know, I started working in Moldova and Ukraine in 2014 when the war first started. Both was initially related to border security programs, and those efforts continue to this day. I'm a personal resident of Moldova and a business resident of Ukraine. My family's Moldovan. My daughter was born in Chisinau, so I'm personally invested in Ukraine and Moldova. Our company, we provided the logistics support to the last U.S. uniformed folks that left Ukraine in February 2022. And our office in Yarviv was hit by a Russian missile in early March. Our company there in Ukraine now primarily supports United Nations and USAID. And we also support many agencies through our team in Moldova. We work around the world, mostly on behalf of the US government, but our largest office is in Chisinau. It's not in Poland, it's not in Romania. And for us, Moldova is naturally a better regional support hub than those countries because of its proximity to Odessa and to the Black Sea. And our team in Moldova is really a testament to the talent that's there and the support that it can provide. You know, our architects, our engineers, our IT, our legal. As mentioned before, the talent is there, and those that aren't in Moldova are eager to return. And those of us that have spent time there understand why. As a demonstration of this, we recently ran a program for the Harrisburg University. It was sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. It included 3D printers, and we had 3D printers in Ukraine, in Kyiv, and in Chisinau in Moldova. We showed the ability to do advanced distributed manufacturing around the world, and it was very well received. And I think that it also demonstrated the ability to support from the United States into Moldova and then further on into Ukraine. So there's some technology that's emerging, which allows countries like Moldova to leapfrog over traditional manufacturing. The cool part about that is these technologies are very easy to invest in. They're mobile and they're easy to train, especially with a population that is technologically savvy. So, admittedly, the infrastructure in Moldova needs help, and I think that's the opportunity right now for the U.S. and for the West. For those that are waiting to invest directly in Ukraine, it's been mentioned, Moldova is the way to go. You know, Moldova is one of the few non-NATO neighbor countries. in full support already of Ukraine, and they are working tirelessly to progress to the West. And they need to be supported with results. And I would say even the sectors that have been mentioned, any investment into Moldova are strategic. As the information battles are fought, and we have the opportunity to show results that Russia can't. And it is to a divided population, because demographics are the key to understanding Moldova and its challenges. It's divided. And those lines of division are at every level, down to the family unit. But, I think it's time to get rid of these tired excuses of not being able to invest in Moldova because of corruption or instability. Those excuses are invalid. Investments in Moldova are safe, they're insurable, and U.S. private investment and global investment is much more patriotic than we think. Investments in Moldova are strategic wins for Ukraine. I've had conversations as recently as last night talking about risk tolerance, and you'd be surprised they understand the opportunity. So I think with the right investment mix into things like energy, logistics, advanced manufacturing, I think Moldova can dramatically increase their support for Ukraine right now and into the future for Reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. Given the number of panelists, we're probably only going to have one or two panelists answer the questions, but if there are any questions from the audience, just raise your hand. Let's start right here with this gentleman.
Alex, can you just, can you maybe just elaborate a little more about what you said about plan? Okay, that's needed. That's what you articulated. Again, spend a lot of time in Moldova. One of the constant themes is the need for more investment. Having gained both internally, diaspora, the U.S., from Europe, from Asia, doesn't come in the types of volumes that's needed, that's wished for. So can you talk more about the plan and what that would look like in order to kind of attract that investment to make Moldova a more hospitable investment climate?
Oh, thank you. I'd say it's rather an alignment between the stakeholders, because we can think about sporadic investments here and there coming from Europe or the US, but they will not be as efficient as they might be if we'd have a vision which would be aligned between the Moldovan government, the Ukrainian government, and other stakeholders, and what exactly can be done. What are the areas in which it would be most efficient investing, considering the resources we do have in Moldova or the limitation of those. What are the opportunities and how we can build on them on those specific sectors? What are the needs in Ukraine, specifically in the region we are looking at, as mentioned, Southwest? And how are actually those instruments of support available to companies, foreign companies or domestic companies, which would consider investing in these areas? And I'd say if we have that sort of alignment, which would be further on happening at the political dialogue level, but also interaction between the companies, between the business associations, as we are currently discussing with AmCham Ukraine, for instance, and AmCham Romania, how we can join efforts in building up initiatives which would allow for having these synergies between us, that, I guess, would be significantly boosting the level of A, investment interest, and B, potential of building up on what we have already as resources, but also coming in with some other innovative solutions which may not be on the table today, as the one you've mentioned, right? But maybe some others. Maybe we can go into tech area. It was mentioned the tech area of Ukraine as being very much in focus today. Similarly, in Moldova, we can build on that. Yes,
Please, yes, ma'am.
I'll just add, I'm not a big believer in plans, just because I think if we wait for the plan, it's going to be too late. So I think it's a great thing to attract people, to give them direction. But in the end, I think everyone needs to think about it commercially. And I know we want support from governments and international organizations, but again, I've been investing in Moldova since 1995. The investment environment was often limited, not because of the business rules or corruption, but more because it's a tiny little market. Let's be very frank. It's a small market, population-wise. So now that we have this opening to Ukraine, and we have this opening to Romania on both sides, and we have a clear EU accession path, which is so valuable, I really think just commercially, we need to rethink Moldova. And if you have a particular thing that you manufacture, then okay, then go do your research and see if it's strategic to Ukraine as well. But I think you need to shut down what all investors were thinking when they were looking at Moldova. Well, that's small. We'll go start somewhere else. It's no longer just Moldova. You now have access to the rebuilding of Ukraine, the EU accession, the Romanian market, which had what I think the largest IPO in Europe, happened in Romania this year. I really think we need to rethink how we look at investing in Moldova.
Of course, and we need to talk about this and make those who would be taking these decisions aware of what can be actually done and how they would be actually benefiting of this, commercially speaking. So I guess it's somewhere in between.
Yep.
You need to have a structured way of thinking towards how you are doing that. I'm not speaking about setting it in stone, but of course, I fully agree with you. We need to change a bit the thinking and remodel it, if you wish, change the perception even.
Okay, I think we have time for one final question.
Hi, thank you. My name is Yulia Connell. I represent Dignitas for Ukraine, and we help Frontline with technologies and training. We have actually the biggest hub right now in Ukraine for the drone operators, and we are grassroots. That was mentioned in NATO report as having a strategic impact. So my question actually, what we've seen in the past year and a half, the drone is making a gigantic difference at the front line, and just in general, this technology changes super fast. What we also see that companies, drone companies that United States, Germany, and I've been startups that I've been personally talking to, they do not have enough access to the front line to understand how fast it's changing. So what Ukraine right now has, the manufacturers have a full access to the front line and can change things very quickly. So now Moldova is very close. So is it their general understanding or how technology developing in Moldova could both help Ukraine and Moldova, because it's also, same language, there's no language barrier, there's no distance barrier, there's same time zone. There's so multiple and so many advantages that many other countries right now don't have. So my question would be, is this the area that Moldova look at to develop, to put money, to prioritize?
Thank you for asking about technology development in Moldova. I'm going to actually turn to Mark to chat about this initially, and then we're going to head over to Eli. So Mark, you want to kick us off on some of the great work USAID is doing to help in technology development in Moldova?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sectors that I would advocate for the private sector, technology clearly is one. I mean, I think one of the shared positives of the war is the technology sector in Ukraine and Moldova, it actually has seen growth since the war. And so it's both with the education of the workforce, jobs that actually can keep populations, particularly young populations there. In Moldova, we're investing significantly there. As a result, there's the essentially government in a box in Moldova that was announced in June of 2024, the EVU app that over tens of thousands of Moldovans have signed up for. It's also similar to what's taken place in Ukraine that USAID has invested in for public services, improving transparency and advancing Moldova's digital transformation. So some of the examples of, frankly, what's happened in Ukraine, which have just been leaps and bounds on many of the technology fronts active, the Moldovan government and Moldovan private sector also is seeing. So I do think that there's obviously linkages that could be done and connectivity that could be done across both lines. And again, in addition to energy infrastructure, the tech sector is one that, if I was in the private sector, I'd be looking at very closely in Moldova. But I know Eli potentially can see some benefit cross-border comparison between Moldova and Ukraine.
Yeah, I think you really pointed out a huge advantage that Moldova has, going back to the point about being able to invest in Moldova from the United States or from other countries, and sort of test bed some of those technologies, and being able to get feedback from the front lines right? Without actually having to send technicians out there. And that's, you know, the risk of putting people in harm's way does slow some larger companies down. But we're seeing increased interest in the advanced manufacturing and advanced technologies to overcome some of those tyrannies of distance and risk. Virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D printing, all of these things can be developed in Moldova and put into immediate use into Ukraine. Medical, defense, there's a myriad of applications. So yes, I do think that's one of the main efforts that should be looked at.
So thank you everybody for coming today. I know we're just a couple of minutes over. This has been a great discussion. Hopefully you're all leaving here with new insights into the role that Moldova can play in an eventual Ukrainian reconstruction. I am sure there are other questions out here. Our panelists will be here during the coffee break, so feel free to grab them and continue the conversations on this side. Thank you all.